All right. So, well, hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Geospatial Advances to Close the Digital Divide. My name is Amy Holmes, and I am the Membership Associate at National States Geographic Information Council. If you are unfamiliar with our organization, NSGIC exists to advance effective national coordination of geospatial information by supporting state-level cooperation. We serve as a national forum for the development of capable and future-oriented geospatial leadership. If you'd like to know more on how to get involved with us, please visit our website, www.nishjic.org. I will shortly pop that address into the chat box shortly. Some reminders for our call today. Please make sure that your microphone is muted on entrance. There will be time at the presentation for Q&A. Please place your questions into the chat box. They will be answered in the chat box and be read aloud at the end of the presentation. Additionally, a recorded version of this webinar will be made available afterwards, so be on the lookout for an email with that information. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the presenters. Sandy?
Oh, I almost said good morning because it's morning for me, but I guess it's afternoon probably for the majority of folks joining us. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today to discuss geospatial advances to close the digital divide. Data Mark of Michael Baker International would like to thank NSGIC for supporting our webinar today, and we are happy to be a sponsor of the many efforts of the NSGIC membership. If you are not currently a NSGIC member, I highly encourage joining, as a lot of really positive initiatives are happening within this group. My name is Sandy Dyer. I'm a client success manager with DataMark, the public safety team of Michael Baker International. My background comes from a long career in local and state government focused on public safety, and more specifically in 911 and next generation 911. I'd like you to meet my co-presenter for today's discussion. Jeremy, would you like to share a little bit about yourself, please, sir?
Sure thing. Thank you, Sandy. So as Sandy mentioned, my name is Jeremy Jorick. I am a GIS program manager with Michael Baker International out of our Pittsburgh headquarters region. I've been with Baker for 15 years, and my background is in GIS, geography, computer science, and within the last 10 to 12 years, telecom and broadband planning. Thanks, Sandy.
Thank you, Jeremy. So folks, please accept our apologies. We're going to turn our video off. We want to preserve the bandwidth for the presentation itself. So give us a moment while we stop the video for us. Okay. So just a quick background, Michael Baker International actually has 17 teams and practices, including DataMark and GIT, which is the program that Jeremy's with, the Geographic Information Technology Program. But we also have bridge, highway, rail and transit, intelligent transportation, aviation, and all other common services you'd expect from a large consulting engineering firm. And last year we did celebrate our 80th year anniversary. Jeremy specifically is a wealth of knowledge regarding many industries to include broadband, having participated in several projects for Michael Baker International. And he's going to be sharing with us a specific case study on closing the broadband digital divide, and will provide information on what broadband planning for your community may look like. So let's take a look at today's agenda. So the first thing we'd like to talk about is, what does the movement towards broadband improvement look like? Did quite a bit of research on this, and I was really, I guess for myself personally, pleased about that. So I wanted to share with you what I had found. State and local efforts for better broadband will be the next thing we'll cover. And then going in, Jeremy's going to take over from there and give us his case study of Beaver County, Pennsylvania, the project he did with the Office of Planning and Redevelopment. And then he is also going to discuss with you broadband project planning and implementation. Let's get started by looking at the movement towards improving broadband. Access to broadband is a necessity for today's modern society, and recent events identified a large gap in our ability to function, exposing what was once thought of as a luxury and elevating it to a need. The disparity of access to resources and information was prevalent, whether due to socioeconomic limitations or deficiencies in infrastructure, whether that infrastructure was physical, like actual lines in the ground, or data-driven. The recent events established the perfect environment to challenge the speed test, if you will, of broadband accessibility. And although we suspected there was a disparity, we lacked the empirical evidence we gained for the past year and a half. To correct the disparity, actions have been taken to address the gap that played out in front of us. Through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the Broadband Data Act, the rules and funding have been established to improve broadband access. And based on the non-binding commitment by the House to vote on the infrastructure bill by September 27th, there is hope that the roughly $1 trillion act will be passed, providing necessary funds over 8 years. The infrastructure bill defines a broadband appropriation of $42.45 billion with a minimum initial allocation of $100 million for each state. An additional allocation of the remaining amounts will be on or after the date on which the broadband data maps are made public, which I believe was May 15th, but don't quote me on that. I did a lot of research, but admittedly, maybe perhaps the research got a little bit confused. An important aspect of the infrastructure bill is the focus on the underserved, unserved, and anchor community institutions, which include public safety entities, among many other government and community support organizations. Within the infrastructure bill under section 60102, titled Grants for Broadband Deployment, it indicates the eligibility entity is a state. It does include subgrantees and includes provisions for political subdivisions and consortia to apply for grant funds should an eligible entity be unsuccessful. It also provides information on what is considered a covered application, which would include a letter of intent, initial proposal, or a final proposal, although I would look for a future process to better define the parameters of the grant. The American Society of Civil Engineers 2021 report card for America's infrastructure found a need to focus on unserved and underserved communities when they identified 65% of counties were not meeting the FCC's definition of broadband, and that 1 in 5 school-aged children lacked high-speed internet connection. The ASCE report card also indicated that the committee determined there was insufficient information on broadband infrastructure to justify a category grade, but found it prudent to make recommendation on how to improve broadband infrastructure. The recommendations from the ASCE infrastructure report card included, among other recommendations, ensuring the updated maps required by the Broadband Data Act are developed in close coordination with state, local, and private stakeholders, that states and municipalities close the gap in digital for all through a coordinated approach to ensure broadband is built out to underserved populations, and the prudence of co-location of broadband, a dig once philosophy, much like our GIS philosophy of build once, use many. I apologize, folks, I've got a tickle in my throat. The disparity in broadband accessibility has called for improved definition of the needs around it, not just as they pertain to the minimum connection speeds. It's been recognized that the high level of data collection in previous efforts, such as census block assessment, may not have been the best way to define the level of accessibility when it comes to location. New efforts to include house by house, location by location information to determine where broadband access service is available, and to standardize location through the use of a broadband serviceable location fabric. While the FCC second order and third further notice noted that the Broadband Data Act authorized the creation and maintenance of the fabric, funding hadn't been appropriated to implement. Congress recently authorized funding for the digital opportunity data collection and the fabric, enabling the commission to move forward. As part of the restructuring of the broadband mapping, the FCC third report and order identified a process for collecting verified data from state, local, tribal, and federal agencies as a necessary component to implementing a broadband locations fabric database. It also allowed the commission to adopt a fundamental definition of location for the purposes of the fabric. Now, it's important to note that any government agency with the intent to approve will have the ability to challenge the data contained in the fabric database, as well as any data submitted by internet service providers. As geospatial and public safety professionals, location has a very distinct meaning to us. Therefore, it is important to understand how broadband location is defined down to each type of location so that there isn't confusion. Location is defined as a business or residential location in the United States at which fixed broadband internet access service is or can be installed. And each location has a single point defined by a by a set of geographic coordinates that fall within the footprint of the building. Further definition has been applied for each location type as well, and let's take a look at that. So residential location is all residential structures, including all structures that are or contain housing units or group quarters based on the US Census Bureau definition of these terms. A business location is all non-residential structures that are on a property without residential locations, and that would be expected to demand broadband internet access service. And then a multi-tenant environment as a single record in the fabric and to the extent feasible to associate the number of units within. Although I'll have to admit, I didn't find a further explanation of how to associate the number of units within. So hopefully maybe someone can share that information with me, but I didn't find information on that specific part of the definition. And while many of you will say, and I know some of you are going to say this, we already have a single point address data set, I would ask you to see the possibilities rather than the limitations of this definition, as few of you have a complete master address database with verified geodetic coordinates for a single location, since this level of quality can be cost prohibitive due to limited funding, resources, and staff to perform on the ground efforts. And I don't mean for that to sound like pointing fingers, but it's not my intention. I know from my own experience that while we have some really great data sets out there, the data sets are generally more collaborative efforts of migrating together multiple data sets than really having true quality data that we can feel really confident about in a next generation I1 environment. And even with the lack of legislation to provide for specific NG911 needs, the broadband initiative, much like the transportation aspects of the infrastructure bill, can support a key need of next generation 911, and that is highly accurate, authoritative GIS data. When you couple that with an opportunity to work collaboratively at every level of government, remember the eligible entities of state, you can have sub-grantees, those recognized political subdivisions are a part of that, and the fact that both the Act and the Broadband Act are already calling for state, local, federal, tribal participation, we really have an opportunity to enhance multiple public needs, whether it's going to be broadband, transportation, addressing tax, election, or even census. And a properly focused project has the ability to optimize each dollar spent. So let's take a look at some of the state and local efforts for better broadband to give you an idea of what others have focused on previously. Okay, so from a federal efforts for better broadband perspective, we had the pleasure of supporting the national broadband effort through the National Broadband Map Data Quality Assessment Project. And this project included a 5 billion record analysis and confidence scoring for the national broadband map. And then from a state level in New York, we supported their Broadband for All program with GIS and mapping support and a reverse auction, among other things. In Pennsylvania, as part of the Pennsylvania Broadband Service Mapping Project to support the state's Broadband Initiative program. This project included data collection, assessment, and the development of a web map application and multiple surveys. For the Commonwealth of Kentucky Broadband Mapping and Planning Project, data collection, analysis, and validation was performed to include field investigation. A GIS database, mapping application, and website were developed, as well as surveys to support community outreach. For the state of California, data processing was performed an analysis of 14 million address points and 11 telco cable provider polygon datasets to produce an aggregated 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer broadband 6-tiered speed grid across California. The project included data conversion, geocoding, statistical analysis, and apologies again, cartographic services. Never fails. You present and you get a tickle in your throat. My apologies, folks. For Louisiana's broadband service mapping project, we were able to perform data collection, analysis, aggregation, and validation to include field investigation. A GIS database, mapping application, and website was developed, as well as surveys. This one included provider outreach, which can be a concern for some SPs about their ability to perform on their own. And then North Carolina's broadband service mapping, which include GIS data development and integration. We also provided geocoding and consulting services, as well as GIS web application design, development, and hosting. And then let's focus on the local level efforts for better broadband. We were able to support the counties of Allegheny, Garrett, and Washington as part of the One Maryland Broadband Network. The projects involved the design and permitting of over 80 miles of aerial and buried fiber optic cable that provided broadband service in the counties. The Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission Region's Regional Broadband Connectivity Conditions Analysis Project included data collection, analysis, and the development of a GIS database, software, and a mapping application. And then Beaver County's Broadband Connectivity Project. Now, this is the case study that Jeremy, my co-presenter, would like to share with you. Jeremy, would you like to take over from here, sir?
Yeah, sure thing, Sandy. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Give me one moment, please. Okay, thank you, Sandy. So I want to dig deep into an actual case study for a local effort for better broadband. And this is actually an ongoing project which is nearing completion. This is in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, and it is what they are calling their broadband connectivity project. Now, all the bullet points on the right-hand side, we're going to walk through subsequent slides. But I kind of want to set the stage first on how Beaver County came to realize their need for a broadband program. Okay, so Beaver County has a holistic view to infrastructure, you know, not siloing broadband and siloing water and siloing sanitary sewer, for example. They think about, you know, this dig once kind of policy. How can we get the best bang for our buck? You know, in the event we get limited funds for infrastructure deployment, how can we best utilize that funding? And to set the stage here, Beaver County is, you know, we're geographers. A lot of folks on this call have a geography background. So, you know, we often come back to site and situation. So Beaver County, Pennsylvania, as shown on the bottom right-hand corner here, is within the southwestern portion of Pennsylvania. The Ohio River goes right through the middle of the county. And it's an interesting county as there is highly rural and agricultural areas, as well as 3 cities as well. In between that, there's also a host of river towns along all of these major rivers within Beaver County. The population's around 165,000, and it's unique in that its border to the west borders both Ohio and West Virginia. Okay, so to start this off, in late 2018, we were working with Beaver County on the need for an infrastructure study. The idea here was a comprehensive plan was being considered. The very first thing the county wanted to do was understand the infrastructure within Beaver County, and is that infrastructure mapped in a GIS format or not? Are there still hard copy documents sitting in a file somewhere that need digitized? So we performed an infrastructure study with a focus on GIS. We delivered that in February 2019. We analyzed energy, municipal assets like water, stormwater, sanitary sewer. Kind of at the last minute, honestly, we put broadband availability in there. Just trying to think a little bit ahead on some things that might come down the road. Now, the idea here, especially for broadband, was twofold. The first idea was, let's position ourselves for available funding, kind of in anticipation of applying for grant monies. You know, if you show you have project readiness, you're more likely to pull in grant funding. The other idea is what Sandy was talking about. So the new Broadband Data Act will allow for government entities to challenge data, whether it's base data or data provided by internet service providers. We will, in the future here, have the ability to challenge that. And Beaver County was positioning themselves to make sure they were able to properly challenge data as to allow more broadband funding to potentially make it within the county boundaries. As part of this infrastructure study, we developed a broadband dashboard. So we took all the available broadband connectivity data sets, and there are various ones out there. And the most notable right now is the FCC's Form 477. This is mapped at a census block level for fixed broadband. You know, think cable, fiber, DSL. And for mobile broadband is, you know, you can download actual wireless shape files of that. We took that data along with some UCLA, MLab, different speed test data, published that to a broadband dashboard for Beaver County, and which you can see on the right-hand side here. As typical with mapping applications, green is good, red is poor. So the areas in green on the map are areas that have high-speed internet, they have access. The areas in red and orange are the areas that are struggling as of right now. One thing we did with our processing tool for Form 477, we created a Python script that allows us to kind of slice, I call it slice and dice. We can slice and dice this data to make it useful for our client. So this data is a gigantic CSV file that you would download from the FCC. What we do, we pull that CSV file in, map it to a geography, and break it up by speed, service provider, and broadband technology type. Another thing we did, tying in the NG911 aspect of this, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency just flew statewide aerial imagery, and that was released right when this project started. So we had the advantage of pulling in that image service into this web mapping application. And there are specifically eight county-owned towers for the purpose of emergency management. And as you might guess, these 8 towers are in more of the rural area of Beaver County, where we have a lot of terrain and topography issues to deal with. So that kind of sets the stage for something later on in this presentation. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here on the broadband availability dashboard. 2 items of note. So the first thing we do is filter on the download speed, which are the orange and red on the top, and then upload speed, which are the orange and red on the bottom left. Now, these filters mimic and match exactly what the FCC defines as broadband, which is 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. Whenever we click on those filters, we see these areas in orange and red within Beaver County that are just scattered throughout the entirety of the county, which, to be honest, didn't surprise us. The one thing that did surprise us, though, as we zoom into a different location here in southern Beaver County, we start to look at, a street level analysis here of the broadband mapping. Now, again, this is mapped to a census block boundary. So if there's one customer that has high-speed internet or broadband within a census block, that whole census block is considered served. What we're seeing here in orange are areas that likely only have a slower DSL or potentially only satellite. But the thing with local knowledge, I'm actually from Beaver County. So we looked at this map and you can see the 5 address points that are not within the orange and red. These technically, if I had the green layer turned on to show high-speed internet, these technically fall within a high-speed zone, but we know that is not true, just with local knowledge and understanding the mapping. So as we look at this, we know these 5 locations also do not have access to broadband, which also means if federal funding comes through, these folks here are going to continue to be overlooked because they're considered served when they truly are not. So what we did, we kicked off we took the infrastructure connectivity project and moved forward with it with a specific look at broadband. So a couple of things that we did. Very first thing was get the public engaged. And if you're the public, understanding what the government is up to, very first thing you do is a Google search or go to the web. So first thing we did, of course, was create a broadband website specific for Beaver County called connectbeavercounty.com. And on this website, you can understand the county's intent. Why are they performing various studies? Get information about broadband. What is broadband? What is upload and download? What do these acronyms mean? So we put a lot of information there. Also, this allows folks to take a speed test and run a survey. Here's a look at on the left-hand side, the survey that we pulled together using Survey 123 with ArcGIS. It asks the public some very straightforward questions with the ability to freeform type some comments and information. Also, we did some conditional selections. For example, if someone would say they subscribe to Comcast, we didn't want to demonstrate the 10 different available technology types that exist throughout the United States. We were able to filter that down to say, okay, we know Comcast typically is a cable provider, maybe 1 or 2 others in this region. So we tried to make it user-friendly for the public. The other thing they can do is run a speed test. The speed test pulls download and upload speed and ping and jitter statistics. Depending on the time of day and how many folks within the business or household are utilizing the internet, those variables can definitely vary. The thing we like about the speed test is it will identify who your service provider is, so we can start to understand the extent of the internet service providers within Beaver County. And then field verification. This is the bulk of the project that I'm going to speak to. There are 3 main reasons we took a boots to the ground approach here for Beaver County. Very first reason was to spread the word. In the middle here, you see a door hanger. We equipped 2 different engineering teams, one in the northern part of the county, one in the southern part of the county, with 2,000 of these door hangers. Anytime they visit a location, they'd place this door hanger on the door, and it allowed the resident or business owner to understand, first off, what are we doing there? Why are we here? And it directs them to that website so that they can take the survey. Now, I've done a lot of field work, and I've never seen the public so responsive to field operations. Whenever we described why we were on site doing this, they wanted to talk about it and provide information back to the county commissioners and the planning department. So it was a very public-facing engagement. So that was number 1. Number 2, the next thing we did while we were on site at these 2,000 locations that we deemed to likely not have broadband access was do a field inventory. We did a pool inventory. took photographs and identified if fiber, cable, or nothing. Maybe there's only DSL at a location, basically documenting all that. And the third thing we did was we performed speed testing. The application on the left-hand side, you see a little speedometer there. We tied in our speed test application with ArcGIS field apps. And we speed tested the 3 main mobile wireless carriers in this area. And I'll show you an example of that. Okay, so we're gonna dig in here to a couple of examples. Here we're looking at structure 302. Now what's interesting here was this location was deemed to be served. It showed up in that area as green, but per our desktop review, we thought this might not have access to fiber or cable. And guess what? The photos came back. We were here, May 11th. The only broadband infrastructure available for these folks are satellite, Viasat and HughesNet. And even though the utility poles would support the access of cabling, they did not have access to high-speed internet. And in fact, talking with the resident, whenever the satellite would fail, they would run off of MiFi devices, hitting their mobile wireless carriers. So looking at the blue location here, anytime you see a blue dot on the map, that infers that we ran speed testing for the 3 main mobile wireless carriers. And at this location, mobile wireless speeds actually weren't too bad. So AT&T download and upload speed were pretty good for this location. T-Mobile had the best. There's been a expansion of T-Mobile's 5G footprint in this region. So I think that's what we picked up here. And then Verizon was very similar to AT&T at this location as well. Moving on to another spot in southern Beaver County, more the agricultural region. And I think this case example applies throughout the United States. So we're looking at 335 Hookstown Road. Very similar to our last location. There was no infrastructure available. The poles in the area do support access, but as you can see, pretty much it's an electric line running to the household. Moving on to the blue location here for speed testing. AT&T has the fastest mobile wireless connectivity for this resident. You know, with T-Mobile and Verizon also providing fairly decent download speeds, but some struggle with upload speeds. Now, these are just 2 examples. I can tell you throughout the county, we've run into examples where there is only maybe access to DSL, which is fairly slow download and upload speed, but there's also poor mobile wireless access. So our intent, the reason we checked on these 3 mobile wireless carriers was to kind of identify the folks who are in most need. If we only have limited funding, who should we look at and serve first? One other item of note, while we're out in the field here, we ran across a local police force. And in this borough, whenever a 911 call comes in, a lot of the times they'll dispatch 2 cars out instead of just 1, because a lot of times there's some issue with connectivity and calling for backup. So it's almost a safety measure where they have to send 2 at one time. This is very telling of the connectivity in this region.
And you know, Jeremy, you bring up a really good point though. And for if there are any public safety folks on the call, or even if there's not, so couldn't you use this to be the same time since people are in the field, like to test FirstNet access or do the wireless testing that's needed for wireless 911? I mean, there are FCC rules around that as well. And county level testing is really valuable, especially for the PSAP, as long as you have permission of the 911 center to do it first. I mean, could that be built into a project?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, a lot of times you hear of drive testing along, you know, interstates and roadways, but this could certainly be built in as well. This project, we worked, the Planning Commission of Beaver County worked hand in hand with the 911 and Emergency Management Department. And in fact, some of the next screenshots we're going to look at actually improved I want to say coincidentally, but there was intention behind this, actually improve the master address database. So yes, there's all kinds of, if you're putting boots on the ground, get the best bang for your buck and collect as much data as you can. You're right, Sandy.
Okay, cool. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Okay, here we're looking at a rural location, 147 Cross Road. Our staff visited this spot. As you can see, 147 is not on the structure. And what occurred here at one point in time was this is a parcel centroid. I don't have the parcel boundaries turned on, but that's what we're seeing here. Our staff were able to identify that this location this address point needs to be brought over to the building footprint. Here's another example looking at these two locations. When talking to the 911 department, doing a desktop review, at times there can be some ambiguity to which structure actually is the addressable structure on a property. Looking at this, if I had to guess without doing field work, the location that is 247, it does look like a house, but behind it, you see a swimming pool next to another large structure. You would think that this was another unit, or it would be like 247 apartment A. But upon our field visit, we were able to verify that this truly was a garage that just so happened to have a swimming pool right behind it. Moving forward, here's another example in a little bit more of an urban area that's kind of flanked to the east and the west with mountainous terrain. So there were some mobile wireless connectivity issues in this area. But looking at 171, our field staff was able to verify that, hey, this place has been raised. So we report this back to the 911 department and also to the planning department, and in which the 911 department can denote this address point as archived, and the planning department can look at this for their raised program within this city. Okay, those are just some examples of some of the locations we visited. As I mentioned, this was a very extensive effort all summer. We looked at over 2,000 different locations. And if you would embark on a program, my recommendation is to make sure you give yourself sufficient time to talk to the residents and business owners when you're out there. Whenever we kick this project off, especially the field work, we kind of thought, well, it's going to be maybe a 6-week effort. But really what happened, we wanted to take all the feedback from the residents that we could. It ended up being more like a 2-month effort. So make sure you give yourself ample time. But the outlook, summer 2021 is ending. And actually, we just completed the boots on the ground effort about a week and a half ago. So survey compilation, field work, and speed testing are complete. This fall, specifically October, we are going to give the county a report on the findings from the survey and the fieldwork results. And what we'll be able to do here is actually give them a true gap analysis, not just 477, what it says, but that plus what we learned with our boots on the ground in our survey from the public. And then this winter, the county fully intends to utilize recovery funding for broadband deployment projects. We're just trying to figure out exactly what dollar amount that might be. Beaver County specifically received around $92 million in funding that, a portion of that could be used for broadband deployment projects. And then kind of setting the stage moving forward, I say moving forward, but this actually has occurred naturally. Again, if you're going to embark on a program like this, start to engage broadband internet service providers right away. Number one, just to let them know what your intentions are. And number two, just to find opportunities to work together. Some of these broadband internet service providers will share their data as an agreement with them. Some are also very open and may even pass data along without an NDA if it's in their best interest to market their territory. Typically, this is ISPs that serve businesses, for example. Moving forward, also the county is going to enter into talks with some mobile wireless providers to lease space on their 8 towers. And the next thing is community connectivity hubs and connectivity workshops. So Beaver County rolls up into a metropolitan planning organization called Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. We worked with the commission to create something called a digital equity index. And what this index and map application does, it addresses things outside of access. So let's say you do have access, but you can't afford broadband, or you have access, but you just need skills on how to use hardware and software. These community connectivity hubs would be the solution to that. And those mapping applications help us identify where they should be. So the Beaver County example was a case study, but I kind of want to fit this into the broader scope of what is broadband planning and implementation. And this is kind of how I visualize the workflow and roadmap. So it's kind of 2 phases. We'll break it up. 2 different buckets. The first one on the left is the planning phase. This is essentially where we're at. This is what we're talking about. Step 1, if you haven't done so yet, and you're interested in this type of project, very first thing is figure out who your team is, who's your steering committee, who are your stakeholders, who do you want involved from the get-go. Step 2 is kind of what this presentation was about. You need to start to assess the actual broadband gaps and needs. And again, that need might not just be that you can't connect, but affordability and various issues that you would gain from the public. Step 3 is engaging stakeholders. A very good example here would be interacting with local legislators, which is something that we've done a lot this summer through this project. Step 4, just become knowledgeable of what technology options exist. They are rapidly evolving, so keep a pulse on that. Step 5, selecting a model for infrastructure deployment. And don't think of this so much as technically how would you do it, but what is your governance structure? Do you intend to do a public-private partnership? Do you want to work with one entity? Is it a co-op with a utility provider? There's all kinds of different deployment models. Step 6, develop that project plan. And last, the implementation phase looks like this. And again, this is agnostic of what technology you actually implement. Steps A through H are the general flow for how a broadband implementation project looks. Step A, we mentioned a couple of times, like a dig once policy. So develop beneficial policies that help the municipalities you work with, but also help the broadband internet service providers stand up infrastructure. Step B, step C, and D are related to that project planning and getting some engineering involved. And depending on the deployment model, you may need to issue some RFPs or a request for bid, especially if you're working with like a reverse auction, lowest bidder type model. But there's various ways. If you're entering into a P3 here, that could be an option for step E as well. Then finally, step F, construction and testing. Step G, spreading the word, getting it out there, marketing those upgrades. Step H is turning on the lights and rolling out the service, making it known that, doing mailers and things of that nature so that everything is being adopted. The worst thing you would ever want is to roll out infrastructure and the take rate is so low that it wasn't worth it. So you need to get out there and market the service. So with that, Sandy, I'll turn it back over to you, but I think we can probably roll into questions.
So there was one question that I know I got directly, and they were asking more about the process of challenging the data. Could Could you maybe put some color around that?
Yeah, sure thing, Sandy. So that's still evolving. If you read through the Broadband Data Act, you'll catch reference throughout that one of the, I don't want to call it issues, but one of the previous concerns was that, a broadband map would be released. And even if you knew there could be some issues with it, it was hard to get things overturned. The wheels were in motion and it was hard to get in there to change things. So I applaud the FCC on this and the NTIA. To me, it looks like there's going to be a challenge process. Again, not only on what the internet service provider may submit to the map, but also on the address points and the base data that goes into it. So historically, census block data, we're thinking like 2010, we're still waiting on a lot of the demographics to be released from the 2020. But that data is becoming so outdated. And with some areas that are expanding quickly with a lot of land development, this will allow, better metrics to be developed that would come out of the mapping.
Okay. Thank you for that. We just received another question. And what sort of effort ratio of survey to address did it take to achieve your survey timeline?
I think I understand the question, so I'll answer it. So to frame it from the Beaver County perspective, the public survey went live right before Memorial Day of this year, and it ended actually about 5 days ago, the end of August. During that time frame, about 550 survey responses came in. We specifically targeted a lot of the rural areas with door hangers. I think that door hanger placing was a success. Next door to us in Ohio, there was a study done within 3 different counties. And I think their timeline was a little bit quicker for their survey, but they were around the 700 to 800 respondents. So that's just a quick frame of reference on what to expect.
Thank you, sir. Amy, did I miss any other questions in the chat?
Yeah, we had one question about the slides. Sandy and Jeremy, she's just asked, will these slides be available after the presentation? If you guys like, I can include that in that recording email. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I don't mind, but let me check with Jeremy.
Yeah,
we
sure.
haven't really talked about it.
Yeah, I think they can be shared. Yep.
Okay, I think we just had a couple more. Oh, let's see. Steve asked, so this worked well in Beaver County, but that's a relatively small county. How well would this translate to a large county or state?
Steve, that's a really good question. So what we're seeing here is anytime this concept is expanded out to a region or state, a lot of the boots on the ground effort is being supplemented with market research type firms that leverage surveying capabilities outside of our standard services. And things like that are these call banks, cell phone banks, text message, SMS surveys, and then also mailers. So you can send out, for lack of a better term, snail mail to various locations. Actually, we're embarking on a project here that will be completed in at the end of January. So I'll be really curious to see how our market research vendor, what the take rate of these surveys are. And I can certainly provide that information come, I'm talking 6 months away, but I can provide that to you in February based on what we learn.
And then our next question, what is the total population of Beaver County? It's a 500 response.
Sure, total population is around 165,000. I believe with their master address database, we're looking at about 82,000 locations. I don't have a breakdown of the urban versus rural, but I would suspect that it's probably about 15 to 20% of those locations are in rural areas.
And another question's asked, did you do the field test because the online speed test data collection was insufficient?
That's a really good question. Let me clarify. So the public speed test that's available on the website is more to test your fixed broadband connectivity, your home internet or your business internet. Think anything that comes through a modem. The reason we embarked on mobile speed testing with AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon was to understand, their connectivity issues at every single location that we visited in the field. And again, if the county receives limited funds for broadband expansion, then the county can make sure they connect folks with fiber or cable who also are suffering from poor mobile wireless connectivity. It kind of sets a priority list for the project development.
And then we have another question. Are there any automated tools that you can just drive around with and check wireless speeds are?
There are some tools that you can do this with. Each have their own perk and each have their own downfalls. Historically, there had been previous issues with, battery life, depending on how often that signal is being pinged. But it essentially comes down to what your goals are for the project and determining which technology you want to use for that connectivity or speed testing or drive testing.
And another question we have received, how can USGS 3DEP data be leveraged for improved accuracy of broadband maps and the related telecom infrastructure deployment, especially in rural locations? Are the relevant federal broadband agencies coordinating with USGS 3DEP to expand broadband coverage and close or narrow the digital divide?
So Sandy, I'll take a crack at this one first, but feel free to build upon this. As we've been stating, typically whenever you embark on any kind of project, there's dual use. Regarding the 3DEP elevation program, I'm almost positive there's going to be some sort of correlation, especially for wireless deployment. I think that maybe that concept needs to be vetted out a little bit. John, feel free to contact me. I'm curious on some of your thoughts there. And as for the second part of the question, the relevant federal agencies, FCC, NTIA, I can't speak to that personally, but I would be willing to guess that they are coordinating, but I can't specifically speak to that.
Do we have a NISJIC member in the 3DEP group that maybe wants to help with the question? Or not? That's okay. I believe, because we have there's a 3DEP group. 3DEP, geez, I can't talk today at all, Amy.
There is, I didn't see anyone on the call. Anyone intervene if I'm incorrect.
Right, and we can take this question back to the NISJIC 3DEP group as well.
Yeah, that's a great question.
This is Susan Gitley. I'm actually, I work with USAC, which is the Universal Service Administrative Company. And I do know that fairly recently, the FCC, NTIA, and the USDA released a data sharing and memorandum of understanding. I don't remember off the top of my head how in depth it went. So I do know that at least there's a memorandum out there and that those three agencies are sharing data when it comes to broadband.
Thank you, Susan. And for those that haven't joined a NISJIC webinar before, this is the value of joining. It's the collaborative efforts on these types of questions and the information you gain from others in the chat as well.
Hello, this is Gar Clark. I'm the GIO for the state of New Mexico. Also, I'm a member of the National Geospatial Advisory Committee. And as a result of some federal legislation, the Landslide Act, I believe it is, it's a requirement for USGS, not USGS, but NGAC, to put together let's call it a 3D elevation subcommittee that will be composed of agencies as well as stakeholders. And it's now still in the forming stage. So there is collaboration, and also too, as you all know, through the Geospatial Data Act, there's a requirement to collaborate on the mapping portions between agencies, and which is interesting because we have like 4 or 5 flavors of broadband maps within our federal agencies. So that needs to have some understanding associated with it. I don't have the detail in front of me, but there is some activity on the federal side for elevation conversations. So thank you.
That's a very good point, Gar. Thank you for bringing that up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was, oh, I'm sorry, Sandy. Please continue.
No, go ahead, dear.
I was just going to say, it looks like we're almost at the top of an hour. I did put in the chat box, if anyone does have additional questions, I'd be happy to assist correspondence with Jeremy and Sandy. Their contact information is on the slide, but you can also submit any questions, info@nishik.org, and I will be sure personally to make sure those questions are answered by them. Sandy and Jeremy, any last thoughts, or shall we wrap it up?
No, just appreciate the opportunity to share information with everyone today. Jeremy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy, and everyone from NSGIC. This was great. Thanks for carving an hour of your time out for today.
Yes, thank you so much to Jeremy and Sandy for this wonderful presentation. And of course, thank you to all of our participants for coming on today and joining us, and all the wonderful comments and questions. It looks like we can give everyone 2 minutes of their time back. So thank you again, Jeremy and Sandy, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.